Hey guys, it's Thermal Grease Monkey here, and I'm back once again with another video. In this video, we're going to be testing a different Zen 1 CPU. This time, we're going to be testing a Ryzen 5 1600X. As some of you may know, in one of my previous videos, I tested a Ryzen 5 1500X with a GTX 1660 to see if this would be a good pairing and could the 1500X still play modern games. And overall, it did a pretty good job except for Marvel Rivals. But every other game we played, it did a pretty solid job overall. So I wanted to test out the big brother for the Ryzen 5 for that generation, the Ryzen 5 1600X. 6 cores, 12 threads, better clock speeds and cache. Would the extra cores make a big enough difference? So I took a Ryzen 5 1600X, paired it with 32 gigs of RAM to make sure RAM wouldn't be a bottleneck, and got ourselves a GTX 1660 Super. And after taking all of those components and pairing them together, I tested 5 different games. We're going to test Marvel Rivals, CS2, Dead by Daylight, Helldivers 2, and Black Ops 6. So, getting things started off here, we'll start out with Marvel Rivals. Now, with Marvel Rivals, we're running things at 1080p, ultra graphics settings, and we're averaging about 37 FPS with our 1% lows being 20. When we move things down to high, it fixes things immensely. Averaging about 54 FPS with our 41 FPS 1% lows, and this is really where it smoothed things out and made it a lot better. We did turn on FSR3 for our testing here, so we are getting a little bit of help here. At medium, we're averaging about 60 FPS with 47 FPS 1% lows, and at low, we're at 68 FPS with 54 FPS 1% lows. And honestly, at low, medium, and high, it was a good enough gaming experience. Low and medium is probably where I'd be playing this game for the most part. High wasn't terrible, but I wouldn't sacrifice the performance necessarily. It wasn't so bad that it was unplayable, but it wasn't the smoothest experience. And Ultra, there's not a point of playing at Ultra. Getting into the second game we played CS2. 1080p, started at very high, averaged 109 FPS with our 1% lows being 60 FPS. Turning things down to high, averaged 134 FPS with 82 FPS 1% lows. Medium, 154 FPS average with 84 FPS 1% lows. And at low, we were at 173 FPS with 95 FPS for our 1% lows. Now, our 1600X is running at stock clock speeds, so that does limit us a little bit, as well as our RAM is limited because of the Zen 1 architecture. It is running at slower speeds as well. If you're able to overclock the RAM as well as overclock the CPU a little bit, that would definitely close things up and you wouldn't have these wide swings in FPS between your averages and 1% lows. So overall though, a smooth experience. You're not going to miss a beat. You should have an overall good CS experience unless you're trying to play competitively, then probably you're going to need a little bit more. Playing Dead by Daylight then, moving things over, we're going to run at 1080p, starting with ultra settings, averaging about 91 FPS with 81 FPS for our 1% lows. At high, we're at 106 with 90 FPS for our 1% lows. Medium, averaging about 120 FPS, which was the engine cap, with 97 FPS 1% lows. And at low, once again, the engine cap being at 120 FPS, with our 1% lows being 111. So if you had your FPS cap higher than 120, if the engine allowed it for Dead by Daylight, you'd definitely be getting over 120 FPS on low and probably on medium as well, considering we're hitting the engine cap. But overall, even on ultra settings, a buttery smooth experience. The fourth game we're going to play is Helldivers 2. Helldivers 2, I ran everything at native again just to make things very apples to apples. 1080p ultra settings, we were averaging about 31 FPS with our 1% lows hitting 20, which not a great experience. Turning things down to high, averaged about 35 FPS with 25 FPS 1% lows. At medium, we're averaging about 39 with 28 FPS 1% lows. And at low, we're at 46 FPS with 32 FPS 1% lows. Now, when you did a little bit of FSR3 and whatnot magic, it definitely smoothed out the experience. At your low, your medium settings, you started to get into the 70 and 80 FPS range, and at medium, you were getting close to around 60 FPS. Ultra is still going to be pretty rough. You're using quite a bit more VRAM, but it will definitely be better than averaging 31 FPS with 20 FPS lows. The fifth game we're going to play is Black Ops 6. Black Ops 6 ran it at 1080p, and as far as any upscaling or image quality, everything was set to balanced. just to keep things pretty apples to apples. For Black Ops 6 at Extreme, we're averaging 60 FPS with our 1% lows being 47. At Ultra, we're averaging 65 FPS with our 1% lows being 50. At Balanced is really where we see things smooth out a lot, and we're not dropping below 60, averaging 89 FPS with 71 FPS for our 1% lows. At Basic, we moved to 96 FPS with 75 for the 1% lows. And at minimum, we're averaging 100 FPS with 77 FPS for the 1% lows. Overall, a really, really, really nice experience. And if you're playing on the lower graphic settings, a buttery smooth experience. I started focusing on playing the game more than actually benchmarking. At Ultra and Extreme, you can definitely still play the game, but it's not quite as smooth of an experience. You are going to drop below 60. It'll be a little bit more noticeable. Playable, yes. Enjoyable, no. But overall, I would say the 1600X did a really good job. If you pair it with a decent little budget GPU, something like an RX 580 or a GTX 1660 Super, you might be even able to go a little bit higher, get something like an RTX 2060 or maybe an RX 5600 XT, and have a really good gaming experience. I would say if you're wanting to fix some of those averages, doing a little bit of overclocking for the CPU and the RAM might not be a bad idea if you want a little bit of extra performance. But overall, I think it's a really good option. In a majority of games now, if you have an older architecture, you're on Zen 1, maybe you're on Haswell, Broadwell, or Skylake, Kaby Lake CPUs. I would say if you have at least a 6-core CPU, if you have CPUs that are pre-2018, a lot of those architectures, they are older, and the extra cores, threads, the cache, the clock speeds, they make a really big difference. And with a lot of games coming out now needing the extra cores and threads, as well as you probably running Discord and Spotify in the background, you need the extra cores and threads. Your CPUs, they need the extra help. And overall, it was a really good experience. The 1600X tends to be a little bit more than, say, the 1500X, which is usually 20 to 25 bucks. The 1600X, I usually find a lot of these CPUs 30 to 40. I have seen them drop down to 25 before, though. So if you're having a really close apples to apples experience, I would spend a few extra bucks on the 1600X. It's way better performance. It's a way better CPU. And I had one of my buddies running a 1600X for like 3 years up until just recently, where he upgraded to a 5600G. But his 1600X, he had zero complaints with it through all the games he played. And overall, I think it's a fantastic entry-level option. So if you guys enjoyed the video though, please, if you guys are enjoying these videos, hit that subscribe with hitting that little bell icon so you guys are getting notifications when these videos are going up. If you guys can hit the like button if you guys are enjoying the videos. If you guys aren't, feel free to hit the dislike button, totally understand. And leave some comments for some different hardware you guys want to see me test. I love testing some of this older stuff, some more budget entry-level hardware, because it's where I build a lot of these PCs for people for, is that kind of entry-level budget market. And I would love to be able to test some more of that hardware, and I want to know what you guys want to see as well. So I will see you guys though next week. Later.